Welcome back to Whistle Where You Work. Universities, like the rest of us, understandably love to tout their success stories. And no story is more properly heartwarming than success in educating at-risk students. But there's a downside to be wary of. Universities have a strong incentive to spin their results and sometimes even commit fraud. That's what Colin Browne, an employee of the University of the District of Columbia, blew the whistle on at his school. He claims he was fired for it, and a jury recently agreed, awarding him $282,000 in damages. Welcome, Mr. Browne, to Whistle Where You Work.
Hi.
Tell me about your educational, occupational background.
Sure. I got my bachelor's degree in psychology from Oakwood College, now Oakwood University, and then I went on to do my master's degree in counseling psychology.
And when did you begin working at the University of the District of Columbia?
I began that in the fall of 2006.
And in what capacity?
Program coordinator for what was called a Team 100 program, together to educate, achieve, and matriculate 100 at-risk students.
Okay, and what exactly did you do in that capacity?
My responsibility was to supervise the program, all the day-to-day operations, and basically review the data and report.
And who is Kevin Naker?
Kevin Naker at the time was the director of the counseling center. That was the place where the Team 100 program was housed.
And in the course of your working with him, what did you discover about Mr. Naker?
That he was a very interesting character, to say the least. He presented himself as a doctorate, PhD from Howard University, and did his dissertation on the subject of negrescence, which is black racial identity, and was a licensed professional counselor. What I learned was that he did not have a license, that he did not have a PhD, that he went to Howard University, but he was terminated for incompetence.
And how is it possible that somebody claims to have this pedigree from Howard University, and in the very same city where Howard University is located, the District of Columbia, this person is hired touting this on his resume?
It's amazing. What I've learned is that no one essentially checked into him. He applied for positions and was promoted and worked through his way up in the university for over a course of 8 years.
And there is another thing that bothered you about Mr. Naker, and that is results he was claiming.
Exactly. There was a program, like I said, called Team 100, and essentially the data for that program, when I came aboard, did not exist. The success rate, I was told, was almost 70%, and 69.
What does that mean?
That means that they were able to retain, out of this sample of 100 students, 69 of those students.
For how long?
For over the course of a year. So they came in as freshmen, and they complete the freshman year, and they come back as sophomores. And so at that point, we measure how many of those 100 returned.
And what qualifies one of those people to be at risk and therefore part of this program?
Well, all of these individuals must be randomly selected from the freshman class, incoming freshman class, and they must be first time to college ever, and freshmen.
Okay, and it isn't based upon their grades in high school or any career path in the past or anything else. It's just they're there for the first time, and there's no record of them before that.
Exactly.
Okay. And so what did Mr. Naker say about these students?
Well, he said the program was very successful, and that the past year we'd had a 69% success rate.
Is that good?
Oh, that's really good. Excellent.
How does that compare to others?
It was far better than the average. I think that we were about 14 or 15% ahead of the rest of the university, because what we were doing was comparing that sample to the population. And the idea was to compare this sample with the population and see if we could outperform the population.
And what were you doing differently than the rest of the population?
Well, I don't know what they were doing to get that 69%, because as I indicated, the data just didn't exist.
Was it that it didn't exist, or that the numbers were really less than that?
Well, the numbers were dramatically less than that, and out of the numbers that were presented, it was 42%. Out of those numbers, there was no random selection, and we just really couldn't track down the students. I believe we found maybe 20 or so.
And so what did you do with this information?
I approached the director, Kevin Naker, and I looked at the data.
And he thanked you for telling him that he was misleading everybody. Is that it?
Well, the first time he just ordered me back to my office and just said to cut analyzing the data and move on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was deeply confused at the time.
Mm-hmm. Was it a hostile encounter?
It was a brief, hostile encounter.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing a number of things and just completely out of hand dismissed the whole thing in its entirety.
Mm-hmm.
Just said remove the analysis
Mm-hmm.
of the data that showed that the students weren't eligible and that the students weren't randomly selected. Of course, I didn't do that.
Mm-hmm. And so what did you then do?
At that time, I began to look more into the matter. And I talked to a number of my coworkers, just asking about the previous year. And I went to a previous colleague that was now had been transferred to another department within the university, and
Mm-hmm.
requested the data from the previous year. And she handed over the data, and that's how I learned about all of this in more detail. I found out so much more.
Okay, and what is it that you learned?
I learned that the program wasn't functioning, and that there were 3 people in the past year, 12 months, that had my job. And that one of the previous people also tried to say something, but didn't get very far about the program. He expressed some concern. And I found out that there was work done on the program, and that was helpful to me to kind of see what was done, what kind of format was used, these kinds of things.
So what did you do with this new information?
Eventually, it was a couple months of me trying to talk to Kevin Niker. Eventually, I went to his boss.
Mm-hmm.
And communicated this to his boss.
And who would that be?
His boss was Dr. Belando.
And in what position?
He's the associate vice president.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I spoke with her boss also, who was the vice president of student affairs. I emailed them copies of the data.
Mm-hmm.
I generated a memo
Mm-hmm.
explaining what my findings were. And I talked about all my encounters with Kevin Niker up to that point. With the final one was one where he was smashing his hands against the table, telling me not to go upstairs and not to talk to anybody about this and to go back to my office.
And were the people upstairs responsive to your concerns?
Not at all. In fact, I was unable to find them for several months after I provided this memo, and which was very strange because I met with them on a weekly basis up to that point. So
you have reason to believe that they actually saw the memo?
Oh yes, I actually put a copy in the vice president's hand in addition to the email.
Mm-hmm. And so then what happened to you?
Well, I had a couple meetings with Kevin Niker where he told me to blame all the inconsistencies or irregularities in the data on the admissions office at the University of District of Columbia, which didn't really make sense. And of course, I didn't do that either. Mm-hmm. After that, he told me that he would be auditing my files. And I said, okay, so we're doing a thorough audit of everyone's files? And he said, no, just yours. And his, the anger in his voice, I knew what that was about. I tried to explain to him that I thought it was best for us to come clean with this information now, that federal dollars and district dollars were involved. Mm-hmm. And I told him that on multiple occasions, kind of almost in a pleading sense, like, this is not personal, this is just wrong.
And your concern, in part, must have been that because there were these public dollars involved, that it could result in defunding of the program.
Yes, that was a major part of it, and also it wasn't. It was just fundamentally wrong. Also,
Sure. Yeah. And so, what happened to you then?
Well, at that point, I began to receive a lot of negative feedback, where I'd only been praised up till that point. Not one letter, not one reprimand, not one negative comment.
Yeah.
And so my performance all of a sudden became sorely lacking, and it seemed as though every time I tried to encounter him, he would be very, very tense. And I had meetings with my peers, and he began to berate me before my peers. And I didn't really want to involve anyone else that didn't need to know. But some of my peers told me that they felt that I was trying to get someone in trouble, but they didn't say who.
Right.
And I didn't comment because I felt it was a very, very, very serious matter.
Did you leave UDC voluntarily?
No, I did not. Kevin Niker told me that to go find work, essentially. That was what he told me, and specifically, actually, and then he provided me with a letter of recommendation after I requested it. 2 weeks later, he provided me with that letter.
Okay, so he didn't say you're fired. He said, I'd suggest you find another job.
Yeah.
And I'm going to help you get out of here. And so, appreciative as you were of his offer to help you, you still filed suit against UDC. Tell me about that.
Well, I was there for, I guess, 3 months after he told me to go find work, and I had not found work by that time, and so he removed me, essentially. He told me to get out of the office one day. He just packed up my things, locked my computer, locked my phone, and said leave. And so I packed up my things. However, at the same time, over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, I contacted a number of law firms. Eventually, I reached the unemployment law group.
The employment law group?
Yes, and I interviewed with their staff, and they were extremely thorough. They did background checks on me, on everyone involved in my story, and found that Kevin Neikert actually did not have a PhD, that didn't have enough education to qualify to supervise anyone. Unfortunately, I also learned that supervision he was providing me for my license, I was pursuing my license at that time, was invalid, so I couldn't apply for my license. And so many things came out of that. The employment law group was very aggressive in making sure that I was taken care of throughout the process, and that all the details of the case came together.
And what were you asking? This was under the DC Whistleblower Act, is that right?
Yes.
And what were you asking for as a remedy to your situation?
I wanted to go back to work and continue providing for my family. That was essentially the major concern I had. I knew we couldn't survive off of just my income, and we were rapidly going under financially. That was I would say my second concern. My first concern was that I had several clients who were really, really ill, and when suddenly they came to my office and I wasn't there, the reactions that they had were really painful. They looked me up, they called me on the phone, they were in a lot of emotional pain, and consequently, because I couldn't reach out to them, it was very painful for me also. And so the first step was to go to the university and to tell them, let me see the clients and terminate appropriately with them. And they said, we'll look into it, and I never heard from them again. And so those calls continued for about a month. A lot of, and I tried to follow up, tried to contact psychiatrists for some of the individuals so they can get the medication they needed and so forth. And then, of course, the matters turned to home where the bills were not being paid. And so that became particularly difficult. The employment law group kind of was there in the sense that they really provided me with not only the legal support, but assured me that we would try to work aggressively toward a remedy.
And that remedy turned out to be not getting your job back, but significant damage award.
Yes.
And that was a jury trial?
Yes, it was.
And so congratulations to you.
Thank you.
I know you must rest a lot more easily having a little bit of cash buffer as you try to move forward in your life, and we wish you a lot of luck doing that.
Thank you so much.
Many thanks to Colin Browne for his courage in standing up for the truth about retention rates for at-risk students. We need successes in retention rates, but we need real ones. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Whistle Where You Work.